And so it begins, a mad dash to the finish in the French presidential race. After a surprisingly sluggish start to the campaign, the first round serving up, yes, the predicted outcome, but also its fair share of surprises. The April 24th runoff is incumbent Emmanuel Macron's to lose, say the pollsters. But in a rematch of the 2017 second round, the centrist has his weaknesses. Weaknesses the far right's Marine Le Pen astutely exploited in a campaign so far where she's been out pounding the flesh while Macron's been attending summits. We'll ask about the momentum in the home stretch, sizable protest vote from the extremes, and about the third man, veteran left-wing firebrand Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who fell just shy of leapfrogging Le Pen and who emerges from Sunday's first round as the uncontested leader of a more defiant left. Where will his votes go on April 24th? That's just one of the keys. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at France's uncertain second-round race. Joining us, he advised Macron's campaign back in 2017. Lex Paulsen, executive director of the Moroccan-based Mohammed VI University's School of Collective Intelligence. Thanks for being with us.
Good to be back.
From New York City, Denis Franceschine, national delegate for the French abroad at Marine Le Pen's National Renewal Party. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
From Fontainebleau in the suburbs of Paris, Annabelle Lever, professor of political philosophy at Sciences Po Paris, the French Political Science Institute. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, after Sunday night's election returns and speeches, both candidates hitting the road. Emmanuel Macron traveling to the Rust Belt northern city of Denain. Denain, a stronghold, you might say, of his rival. He came in the company of his interior minister, who's from the north, while Marine Le Pen also got out of the capital, adding an unscheduled trip to the rural village of Torigny-sur-Oreuze, that's southeast of Paris at the northern tip of Burgundy. Now, before we go to our panel, we're joined by France 24 politics editor and co-host of our election night coverage, Mark Perlman. Mark, we're seeing France becomes a nation of number crunchers the day after a presidential poll, first of all.
Yes, absolutely. We've seen those numbers come up, and they're interesting if you compare the numbers of Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen back in 2017. We can compare the first round results, and you see that Emmanuel Macron this year around is nearly at 28%. Marine Le Pen a tad over 23%. So they both improved their performance. Emmanuel Macron by nearly 4 points, Marine Le Pen nearly 2 points. What's interesting is that the spread between them has also grown in favor of Emmanuel Macron. His lead is bigger now, 4.7% versus 2.7%. So you could think Emmanuel Macron is clearly in pole position. He has more votes than last time, and his lead is bigger than last time. The problem is that this is not how it works for a round two, because a round two is a totally different ball game. It's a new campaign, and the math are not perfect in French politics as in other countries, because the numbers do not add up perfectly, because you could think, okay, there might be votes there and there, but it's a much, much bigger chemistry that you have to make happen between now and the 12 days left.
So one of those keys is, will the people who turned up to vote in the first round show up again in the second round? I know that the vote takes place during a vacation period. Some are disgruntled by the choice that they see. Are we expecting a higher or lower turnout in 2 weeks?
It's very difficult to figure out. The turnout was the second highest on record this Sunday.
The turnout or the abstention?
The abstention, sorry. The abstention, sorry. But still, nearly 3/4 of the French went and turned out to vote. So it's, for a democracy, it's rather healthy. We're expecting similar figures in 2 weeks' time. But it's true that there's a question mark, because Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen together have half of the votes, but many of the other voters are not going to be happy, are going to be disgruntled, and some might decide essentially to stay home because, they say, well, my leader was ousted. I do not like Marine Le Pen. I do not like Emmanuel Macron. So I'd rather go fishing or do something else.
All right. And so when it comes to the so-called Republican PAC, let's just tell our viewers what that is. Ever since the 1980s, mainstream parties lend their votes to rivals to block the far right. There are those who outright endorsed Marine Le Pen's Sunday night's rival, or her rival Sunday night, the Socialists, the Greens. They said go out and vote for Emmanuel Macron. And those who chose their words.
We must not cast a single vote for Marine Le Pen. We must not cast a single vote for Marine Le Pen.
No vote can be cast for Marine Le Pen. Her political and economic agenda would lead us to chaos.
So translate that for us. No votes must be cast for Marine Le Pen, but he's not saying vote for Emmanuel Macron, is
Exactly, that's the nuance.
What are they saying exactly? What's the dog whistle message here?
Well, the dog whistle message is, first of all, that's what they will say, and there is some truth to it that when a leader says something, it doesn't mean his voters will do it. And so they say, you cannot tell a voter what to do. He has to make his own mind. And so, but clearly this means three things: either cast a Macron ballot, stay home, or vote blank. And so the other leaders who've said, okay, we want a Macron vote are saying, no, you're being hypocritical here. You're playing both sides. If you really want to fight against Marine Le Pen, you have to call for a Macron vote. Both Jean-Luc Mélenchon, Christian Jacob are saying, this is our policy. We don't like either of them. We absolutely don't want Marine Le Pen to be elected. Basically, the decision will be decided by the polls. I think that if the polls are close, and they are closer between both candidates than last time around when Emmanuel Macron garnered 2/3 of the vote. We're really now talking about 52 versus 48%. The voters for Jean-Luc Mélenchon, even though they might hate or not like Emmanuel Macron, will probably come out and vote more for him if Marine Le Pen is about to enter the Élysée Palace. But obviously, I might be wrong.
Anything's possible, and it'll all depend on what happens over the next 2 weeks. Let's begin with you, Annabelle Lever. Your reaction to what you just heard from Mark Parliament. Mark, by the way, thank you very much. You'll be back with us with our politics show, which we can see, by the way, on our website, france24.com. We will let you go. Many thanks for being with us. Yeah, Annabelle Lever, your reaction when you've had a night to sleep on it. In terms of this whole game now of who do you vote for? Do you call to abstain? Do you endorse? Do you not endorse? What do you make of it all?
Well, this time it seems to me that Mélenchon is much more explicit than last time, where he didn't even say don't vote Le Pen. So it seems to me that compared to last time, the message to his supporters is really crystal clear. And my feeling was last time it was still a bit a curse on both your houses. Whereas this time he's made it absolutely clear that you really shouldn't vote Le Pen under any circumstances. And that seems to me just really important because it gives Macron the chance now to think about, well, how do I recuperate these people? Hopefully he'll put his mind to that because it's really quite important that he's able to speak to the left. Because if you think back to 2017, there was still some sort of feeling on the left that he might be one of them secretly in his heart of hearts. But obviously that's died. I mean, that really has died. And now it seems to me really important that he works out how he's going to talk to Mélenchon voters of the old Socialist Party, people who really found the past few years just incredibly hard to bear.
Lex Paulsen, 5 years ago, Emmanuel Macron said, to borrow the expression we use in French, you can like both wine and champagne. I'll take the best ideas from the left and the best ideas from the right. And as you just heard, people on the left now think Emmanuel Macron, well, he's right-wing, he's not left-wing.
Yeah, we have this expression back in the U.S. That Democrats fall in love and Republicans fall in line. And I remember, as someone who comes from more of a left-wing background, going to those first Macron campaign meetings, in 2017, and seeing that the people who were there from the right were interested in reform and liberalizing the economy and kind of a young, modern entrepreneurial take on governance and lowering bureaucracy. And the ones who were on the left really had a vision about a different kind of democracy, one based on citizen participation, deliberation, and we saw some of that in the Grand Débat and the Convention Citoyenne pour le Climat. But I agree with Annabelle.
The Grand Débat were these sort of town hall style meetings they held during and after the Yellow Vests movement.
Exactly. That massively, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of citizens contributed their thoughts, and something that was really an experiment in participatory democracy that France had never seen before. That was what people like myself were really inspired by Emmanuel Macron. And I think Annabelle is right, that the people on the left who supported Macron right now need a reason to come back, because they've been very disappointed from what they've heard about immigration, about security. They've been encouraged, I think, about the use of the diplomacy in Europe, but have been very disappointed. And frankly, I think Mélenchon's voters will not be easy to win back. There was a poll I saw yesterday that said a third of them already have said they're going to vote for Le Pen, a quarter, and then 2/3, if you include the people who were going to vote for Le Pen and stay home, that's 2/3 of Mélenchon's vote. So only 1/3, according to this poll yesterday, and that could change, said that they were open to voting for Emmanuel Macron. That's the only bunch of voters that are up for grabs right now, and only 1/3 of them are willing to vote Macron. That is a huge problem for Macron's re-election.
It's a huge problem for Macron's re-election, but Denis Francisquin, those Mélenchon voters, if they simply abstain, that's not enough. After all, Marine Le Pen is nonetheless, even though she fared well, trailing in the polls.
Somehow, yes. But again, I'd like to remind our panelists that the previous polls about how the French people like Macron before the election, it was very low in the poll. So, in other words, this specific election is very uncertain. Like, we don't know exactly what the outcome will be. Yes, the poll shows now that, he's leading, but we don't know, like, if someone who didn't vote for him, the first round, will decide to go after him. I mean, Macron has been sold 5 years ago as, the new messiah. He's going to save the world. He was young. He was smart. He was a banker, knowing that it's meaning that, it will be good at an economy, and there was so many things that he did wrong. So I agree with our panelists in a sense that the left has been fooled by the left wing, I would say, agenda for Macron. And
yeah, but my question to you was those Jean-Luc Mélenchon voters, if they abstain, that's not enough for you, right? You need them to actually come and vote for Marine Le Pen.
Yes, they have to come and vote. That's for sure. I agree with you. But we don't know also about all the other candidates. I mean, there's a lot of, we have like about 20% of other candidates that those voters, what they're going to do. It's not because Mrs. Pécresse said, I'm giving my vote for Emmanuel Macron, that it means that her voters will actually do it. So we have a reserve in terms of polls that we're not really certain about, but still I have a lot of hope about the second round actually.
Annabelle Lever, do you see a reserve for Marine Le Pen where she can garner more votes?
I don't know. To me, it seems harder for her than I would expect for Macron. I could imagine Macron mobilizing people who didn't vote this round. The difficulty, I think, is going to be a bit like in the summer in the regional elections, where everyone expected this huge breakthrough of Le Pen voters, and it didn't happen. And I think a lot of the vote for Le Pen this time and in other times are protest votes. I mean, that's very common in majoritarian systems. When they've registered their protest, whether by abstaining or by voting for her, it's really not clear. And I think, well, I don't know, my feeling is around where I am. People who didn't vote in this round, I don't think are going to come out for her.
Well, I don't know that. I mean, I think that's right in the sense that people need to be, who don't care as much about politics as we do.
And there's a lot of defiance towards the system this time around.
Yeah, a lot of mistrust in the system, and that's going to be more energizing to Le Pen's voters. But what Macron had, what we had tried to build in 2017, which was hundreds of thousands of people, had 300,000 marcheurs registered, of which probably about 40 to 50,000 were active on the ground. That's a huge amount of people going and talking to people in the markets, by the train stations, door to door, that giving people who don't follow politics so much a reason to vote.
Can I just say something about this? Because I'm English and I lived in the States for a very long time. It's very interesting to hear Lex stress this. Because to me, what seems extraordinary about French political campaigns is how little campaigning you see outside the big cities. I mean, I don't see posters around here. I don't see people campaigning around here. It feels incredibly odd compared to what I'm used to in Britain or what I remember from the States. I mean, you really felt the excitement, the energy. Even people were pissed off with the whole thing. But here it seems to be like something is happening elsewhere. It's always elsewhere. And it doesn't really pull you in.
It certainly felt like that this time around because we're coming out of a pandemic.
Yes, that's right.
And we sort of had this non-campaign. It was slow to get off the ground. There was a lot of the world's attention was focused on Ukraine. We did see people handing out leaflets. One of the big criticisms of Emmanuel Macron is that he created ex nihilo, out of nowhere, this party, which originally had the same initials as his name, coincidentally. And he wasn't hitting the campaign trail because he wanted to remain above the fray. And local officials from his party frustrated that he wasn't out there.
I think there's a kind of story behind the scenes here, and I'll give you a little bit of an insight from what I've been able to glean from the last few months. Annabelle is right that the people who, like me, who were part of the movement in 2017, who believed in a new approach to politics, faire la politique autrement, talking to people, listening to people on their doors, in their markets, those people are not active this year. And there's a reason for that, because Macron always embodied this tension between someone who cared about a collective movement and really trying to make democracy participatory, inclusive, and someone who believed in elites and experts and technocratic solutions.
But he built this movement where he was the star and it's all about him.
Which was very ironic. But at the same time, he crowdsourced a campaign program. No one had ever done that. Barack Obama didn't crowdsource his campaign program, and Macron did. So we saw that there were little hints that Macron actually did believe in the collective intelligence of an entire movement. However, we see now the technocrats won. Right? McKinsey won this infighting within the Macron movement. And I have great friends who are still active in the movement, but I would say the majority of my friends have left. Why? Because they have seen that it was the technocrats who were able to jockey for power, that maybe Macron still does believe in a renewal of French democracy, but the people who believed like us within the movement are gone.
All right, well, of course, getting out on the campaign trail means mixing it up, and it is a new election now that the first round is over. We saw, as we said at the outset, Emmanuel Macron hit the road early Monday morning, go to the north of France, and there he was mixing it up, like with the senior citizen who called out the incumbent over pension reform.
I voted for you, but I regret it.
Please tell me why.
Why are you stopping pensioners' privileges? When you will no longer be president, what will your privilege be? It will be to keep earning 14,000 euros a month. Will you stop it?
Yes, I'm stopping it.
We'll see.
I promise you, sincerely.
Each time there will be a new president, they will no longer have that money.
I've put it in the pension reforms. I promise you.
Is this too little too late, Lex Paulsen?
Yes, frankly, because I think that pensions are a major issue. We already seen, though, that in the first round, he has maxed out his demographic that supports him the most are old people, or elderly people already. He's losing massively among young people, and in the middle, Le Pen is also very competitive. So the only thing he can do to win back younger and middle class voters, I think, number one, those who agree with him that Le Pen would be a disaster for Europe and for France's place in the world. Number two, the anti-immigration vote, people who think that France should not follow this hardline war of civilizations doctrine of Le Pen. And number three, climate, where he has not been strong. But if he came out and said, I've listened now, I've seen the force behind Mélenchon and Jadot, and here's a commitment to help France make its commitment, building on the projet de loi climat that was already passed. I think that could start to interest people on the left to give them a reason to vote. But if he doesn't do something very strong like that, one exchange on pensions isn't going to do it.
All right, but before I turn to Denis Francesca, let's look at Marine Le Pen. It's her third run for president, and rather than focus on identity politics, the French know what the Le Pen brand is all about. She talked bread and butter issues during this campaign, retail politics as it's known. This as soaring energy costs fueled the worst inflation in decades. Vedika Bael has more.
She's the far-right nationalist candidate once again locked into a runoff battle with Emmanuel Macron. On her third presidential bid, she's risen to narrow the gap between her and the incumbent. But how exactly has the 53-year-old, once considered polarizing, made her comeback?
I will bring back France's sovereignty in all areas, which means the freedom for the French people to decide for themselves and defend their interests. I will control immigration and re-establish security for all.
Seeking to distance herself from her party's allegations of racism and anti-Semitism, the sanitization of her image began with rebranding from National Front to National Rally in 2018. Whilst her hardline anti-immigration platform has few changes, Le Pen has shifted focus, choosing to concentrate on the current cost of living crisis worsened by the war in Ukraine.
With the prices of gas, electricity, and fuel, nobody dares to be ironic anymore. As president, I will decrease the VAT on all energy products from 20 to 5.5%.
Another boon for Le Pen was the rise of fellow far-right candidate and former TV pundit Eric Zemmour, whose inflammatory language and extreme views softened her previously harsh image. She has relaxed her stances on several issues, abandoning her opposition to marriage equality and abortion, and minimized Frexit and her anti-Europe agenda. By publicly discussing her single mother status and love of breeding cats, Le Pen has further transformed public perception as more accessible and soft, something her political opponents argue is just for show.
Denis Francesca, we saw in that report Eric Zemmour, this far-right TV pundit, his campaign was all about identity politics. At the outset, there were those who said that this would split the far right. Instead, as we saw in that report, it seems to have bolstered Marine Le Pen. How much of a boost did Zemmour give you?
Well, it's hard to say because he just made 7%. So it's hard to see how he influenced our campaign. One thing that's very important is like the problem with Zemmour, actually Zemmour was more of a problem because he used our theme, like immigration or insecurity, and he basically like twisted into something extreme. We can talk about immigration. I mean, it's a topic that everybody should talk about. But if you talk about as an extreme way, then you just kill the debate. And so I think what Marine was very smart at is to talk about those topics in a very smart manner. She also, and that's something that we need to point out also in this in this interview, is she did a very good campaign. Like she appeared to many people as being someone that will be able to manage the country. She knows better, about French topics. She looks just very solid in this campaign. And I talked with like some of you colleagues in France, and even those who do not support Marine, even told me that she actually did a great campaign. So I think that's.
Might I ask you something just quickly? It puzzles me when you attack immigration, how you expect to deal with problems of the medical deserts, for example, in areas run by me, in the Yonne, in the Loiret. How exactly you plan to bring back, the qualified doctors, the dentists, the opticians, without skilled immigration from the rest of Europe? I'm really puzzled by this.
First of all, we don't criticize immigration. We criticize the system of immigration, okay? Because an immigrant, is in France because the politics and the politician allow him to be here. That's one thing. Second, I'm puzzled by your question because, are you suggesting that French people, cannot become doctors, cannot achieve those goals, and that we
Well,
have
they're
we have
certainly
to
not
we have
going
to
to the
go
areas around here, are they? I mean,
elsewhere
if
to
they were
find
going, you
doctors?
wouldn't have medical deserts. If French people wanted to work in rural areas, in the professions, they would be there, but they're not. So it seems
Because
to me that you want
there's
to
absolutely no
have
incentive.
people who can fill the hospitals, deal with people who need glasses, who can't get an eye test for over a year unless they go to Paris, who can't see a dentist unless they go to Paris, which is all quite common around where I live. Seems to me you are going to have to think seriously about attracting skilled immigrants.
Well, what we want to do is to make sure there's incentives, for people, for someone who decides, to move out of Paris, for instance, and to be a doctor, or so it's all about incentives. And
And what are you suggesting? What incentives are you offering? I mean, you've had plenty of time to offer them, haven't you? I mean, this isn't news about medical deserts. It's not news about rural areas being depopulated. It's not news about how desperate people are.
I think, unfortunately,
It
though,
doesn't seem to me you're talking about how you solve these problems.
I think what's
I'm
unfortunate
sure
is that
it doesn't escape you that Le Pen has never been in power. So I mean,
she's been a European MP
right
that
now,
failed to show up for her
rightfully
votes.
so. Pardon me?
I said she's been a European MP that's failed to show up for her job habitually. But no, I think this is the kind of debate that this election could have had about what is the positive value of immigration as opposed to just using it to demonize. Unfortunately, Macron made the bet that he could play the head of state and the diplomat. He could be the head of state and diplomat and not engage in the kind of granular
So we haven't had
questions.
a debate so far about the issues yet.
Yes, and I think unfortunately, and what Annabelle and Denise are pointing to here is that this is the kind of debate, the availability of doctors and nurses, that matter more to the average French person, I hate to say it, than what's happening in Mariupol. And I care deeply about what's happening in Ukraine, but I do not think the average French voter is as interested in Macron's calls to the Kremlin as they are in purchasing power, the availability of public services, the quality of public services, and that's the risk that he's taking.
Unfair to, if you pardon me, it seems a little bit unfair to French people. The point is that caring passionately about Ukraine doesn't solve the fact that they need to see a doctor. They need hospitals that have an emergency service. And there are plenty of hospitals around where I live that don't. So it seems to me, you don't have to demonize people and pretend that they're insular or xenophobic or uncaring. They also have really urgent concerns.
I think it's about salience. It's not that they don't care. It's not the number one issue. And the number one issue is purchasing power. And Marine Le Pen, to Dennis's point, has made it a very effective campaign of proximité, of talking to all the local villages and local media. She's done exactly the perfect campaign. If I had to be her campaign, I can't believe I'm saying this, but she has a campaign on the number one issue that French people care about, and Macron hasn't. Even though purchasing power under the last 5 years has gone up 300 euros. Yeah. He has a record to run on, and he hasn't done it.
It's all about perception. A good first round campaign, but Denis Franciscain, we saw what appeared to be a misstep this Monday. A day after the poll, Emmanuel Macron hits the road, and there was this definite sense, our reporters in the field felt, that Marine Le Pen improvised at the last minute. Was this unannounced trip visiting a farm southeast of the capital. Of course, we'll see how the second round campaign happens now that it's a one-on-one matchup and that Emmanuel Macron has entered the ring. All eyes will also be on that April 20th debate. It didn't go well for Marine Le Pen 5 years ago. What's the bar she needs to clear in the debate this time?
Well, I think she needs to continue to develop, ideas and to convince, those who, are still, not sure about voting for her to do so. And also, as the panel said, Macron has 5 years now in office. And so there's definitely a lot to talk about. And I'm very excited about, the next debates that we're going to have with Macron. Macron didn't campaign, for weeks. He refused, any debates. rightfully so. Especially with the McKinsey scandal. But I know I'm eager to start to dig into this debate battle. Again, I think convincing also French people, along with the great campaign that she has done, for the past few months, I think we can have a big surprise actually, in 2 weeks.
The debate will go very differently this time around. She's got a low bar to clear if it's to do better than 2017.
Well, yeah, but you also use the word perception, right? And debates are all about expectation setting. And the fact is that she did so badly last time that she can only do better. And in that sense, that she I think will probably have a very positive bounce. I think the best Macron can hope for, I think, is to speak directly, not to Marine Le Pen, but to speak directly to those Mélenchon voters and voters in the center left and left who are very disappointed with him and who need a reason to come out and vote. And just being the anti-Le Pen is not going to be good enough. So he needs to talk to them. I think getting enmeshed in a debate with Marine Le Pen is not going to help him. What is going to help him is the chance to talk directly to those electors who need a reason to vote for him.
And let's look, Annabelle Lever, again at those numbers from Sunday night. And these aren't polls; these are the hard results from the first round of the presidential election. Emmanuel Macron, best faring for a incumbent since 1988. But as we said at the outset, he doesn't have as many votes to get to reach that 50% threshold in the second round. Jean-Luc Mélenchon falling just shy, 400,000 votes of the second round. It turned out to be much closer, the race for second, than was originally predicted. Annabelle Lever, when you look at the votes, when you look at the fact that young people voted for Jean-Luc Mélenchon, that they deserted the traditional left-wing parties like the Greens and the Socialists in favor of the hard left candidate, and taking into account what Lex just said, that plea that you made earlier for a campaign that's more about the bread and butter issues of how you're going to run the country, are we going to get it over the next 2 weeks?
I don't know. I'd really like to see it. But if I may, one of the other things, there are two things I think I would like to see. One is to see Macron try and explain, to return to the issues of pension as an issue of fairness, because in 2017, or shortly after when he first started talking about it, there was quite a lot of excitement at the idea of breaking up this regime of 42 different forms of pension. That people seemed really excited about that. Unfortunately, it got caught up with the idea of lengthening the length of time until you got your pension. I mean, if I were him, I would return to the theme of fairness, ditch the idea of trying to make people work longer, and really speak to something that actually was popular at the time, the sense that France needs reform and could have it. And he's the voice of the young and the hopeful on that. On the other hand, the other thing I think he needs to talk about is how you finance politics in the future. I mean, across from him, you have a campaign president who has loans from Russia, loans from Hungary, because no bank in France will support her. And there are, it seems to me, real issues to be talked about for the future, about exactly what sort of polity France wants to be. How does it want to organize its politics? How does it want to really finance its political debates, its decision making? I mean, maybe it seems sort of bizarre, but if you want to interest young people, I think you really have to you have to talk about these things because they too care about them.
That's right.
Denis Francisquin, can Marine Le Pen make French voters forget that she's gotten loans from Russia, from Hungary, and that she's been a fan of Vladimir Putin?
To be honest with you, I don't think that's what this campaign is about. I think what the French people have lived for the past 5 years is a decrease in their lifestyle, in their economical lifestyle. That's why campaigning on the purchasing power has been, the key in this campaign. The fact that, Russia loaned money, it's because no French bank allowed, to lend money to Marine Le Pen. Okay, so if there was been a different country, it would have been a different country. But I mean, the real
But she's
question
cozied up
about
to a leader who's meddled in foreign elections, including here in France in the past. She's cozied up to a leader who's invaded a sovereign nation and who continually tries to undermine both NATO and the European Union. Is Marine Le Pen a threat for democracy?
Well, maybe can I just suggest another way of putting it? I mean, if you look at Mélenchon, if you look at other people, even the ones who didn't do so particularly well, they ran campaigns based on the resources they had. They went and they knocked on doors, they did all the other things. They didn't go begging to foreign banks for money to get their third of the voters in France. So it seems to me there really is a question about whether the popular support for Le Pen, which seems so high, isn't predicated actually on a lot of foreign money. And in most countries, foreign money that actually wouldn't be considered eligible in a parliamentary candidate, let alone a presidential one.
Denis Francisquin?
Again, to me, the big issue is no French banks allowed a presidential candidate, to run. That's to me, that's the biggest issue. And I mean, I'm surprised that we don't agree on this.
Are you nervous of the fact that Marine Le Pen, though, is had such close ties with Vladimir Putin when you see that he's invaded Ukraine?
What close ties are you talking about? I mean, she met in the past, dozen of foreign politicians. I mean, it's not as if like she's having dinner with him every night and they talk about, what the French politics should be about.
How many other heads of state did Marine Le Pen visit?
Pardon me?
How many other heads of state besides Vladimir Putin did Marine Le Pen visit and take photos with in the last 5 years? I know when she came to Washington, D.C., not a single congressman, not even Republicans, would meet with her because they don't want to be associated with her. So clearly she thinks that she and Vladimir Putin have a close relationship. And I think there are a lot of French people who don't know yet the depth of Marine Le Pen's admiration for the current butcher in the Kremlin right now. I'm not saying it's going to decide the election, but it is really shameful. It's really shameful, and more French people should know about it.
The issue of Ukraine is one that's sort of the background music right now. As we said, those bread and butter issues are the ones that are more front and center. What hasn't figured as much are things like the environment. Are you surprised, Annabelle Lever, at that?
Well, no. I mean, with such a serious war in the heart of Europe and millions of refugees, worries about nuclear arms, I'm not really surprised that people aren't talking about the environment, although what's troubling is that we should have talked about it earlier. It's not so surprising that we're not talking about it now, I think. The difficulty, of course, is that, and this comes out really clearly in these debates about what's going to happen in Germany, is that because we didn't talk about these things earlier, we're not very well placed to counter our dependence on Russia. I mean, we give some money to Ukraine, but it turns out we're giving vast amounts more to Russia every day. Compared to other countries, though, perhaps compared to Germany, probably compared to England, France seems comparatively well off because you have nuclear power. But there is, it seems to me, a real debate to be had about the environment, about forms of transport that are greener. That's really going to be important for the next 5 years.
We can talk about the next 5 years, but just a brief word about, well, beyond those next 5 years. If we look at the numbers from the first round of the presidential election, exit polls conducted by our research partners Ipsos Sopra Steria show a youth vote that's more radical than in the past. And you see, if you compare just those three big candidates, Jean-Luc Mélenchon coming out tops amongst 18 to 24-year-olds, also tops. He is also faring second to Marine Le Pen among 35 to 49-year-olds. And we see as well that if you add up the votes of the two far-right candidates, among those 18 to 24-year-olds, Lex Paulsen, the far right does better than the left?
What Marine Le Pen has done very well is channel the energy which has existed in France for centuries, that of resentment against the elite in Paris, that is embodied by this young, well-dressed banker sitting in the Élysée. It's why when the Gilets jaunes came to Paris, and I went to kind of meet and listen to them, it was a festival atmosphere because these are people who feel invisible. And the people who feel invisible because of the centralized nature of French politics gravitates towards any candidate who can say to them, I am going to blow up this elite system.
But the youth are doing it. Does the future belong to Marine Le Pen?
Marine Le Pen is making a very smart move by saying that if you don't like the system, if you think the system is being rigged in the favor of international corporations and énarques and bankers, then vote for me. I don't think she will ultimately win that generation because I think actually Mélenchon and Jadot and people from the Green, they are making the smarter bet on climate being the existential issue of this century. And Marine Le Pen has said nothing about climate, nothing. I read all of her 2-page brochure before voting, zero, not one thing. And so if she can't talk about the number one existential issue of this century, she is not going to win the next generation.
Denis Francisquin?
I disagree because, I mean, first of all, she talked about those topics many times. But again, once you enter a political campaign, you also need to talk about the topics like today's topics. And, we just came out of COVID.
Climate isn't one of today's topics? You wouldn't say climate is a topic today? Wildfires, extreme weather, you wouldn't say climate is one of today's topics?
I think when you look at the polls, the purchasing power was on top of of people concerned. People not able to end up their month decently. People who don't have enough money at gas station to go to work. That's what they were complaining about before.
The reason people have to buy gas and the quantities they do, certainly around in rural areas near where I live, is because there are no other forms of transport. So it's not as though the cost of living can be just separated out from these issues of climate change. People wouldn't be so dependent on diesel or on their cars if there were other alternatives around. And she's not talking about how you can deal with that. She doesn't talk about transport.
She doesn't talk about she doesn't talk about using energies that we have in France, like the nuclear energy, for instance. She never talks about that.
She doesn't talk about how you create transport infrastructure in rural areas that answers to rural needs. If she doesn't do that, she's not addressing either the cost of living or the issue of climate change.
The high price at the gas station is not because it's not a problem of transportation in rural areas. It's because of crazy high taxes.
The price of petrol wouldn't be affecting people's cost of living if they didn't rely on it for absolutely every journey they made.
And if we weren't hostage to Marine Le Pen's buddy in the Kremlin, who is now, raising costs, and the dependence of France on foreign oil and gas is the number one reason why people are paying more at the pump and why we're all in debt to the petrostates of the world. This is just an economic fact. If France wants to have a lower cost of living, more economic sovereignty, independence, it's not going to be by kicking out brown people. It's going to be by developing these sources of renewable energy here. France has incredible wind and solar and the ability to produce food.
I'm sorry, sir. You cannot say that our agenda is to remove brown people.
Well, then what's this war of civilizations? You tell me. What's the war of civilizations?
Marine
what's the war of civilizations?
Marine never talk about a war of civilizations. She always
last night she talked about it.
She always disagree with the concept. No, that's not true.
Well, Zemmour's out. You have to face this now.
I understand you're on Macron's side. I get it, but you have to be honest.
On the side of democracy and liberalism.
One at a time.
Go ahead. Tell me what Marine thinks about immigration. Then go ahead.
Well, she thinks that we are entering, the world is changing. Okay, the worldwide population is growing. So the waves of immigration will touch every Western countries, in the future. Okay, that's first thing. Second, she also wants to choose what type of immigration, do we need and what. Right now we have huge amounts of immigration, and they are a weight in the economy.
I don't think France is a particular target for immigration. This really isn't correct. I mean, as I understand it, France has a comparatively low level of immigration compared to other countries.
But you can
So
say
this
all those
idea
things.
that people are somehow flooding France.
You can say all those things without talking about civilization being under attack by these outsiders. Most of these people are coming to work, to find jobs, to be with their families. They're not coming to attack Molière and Voltaire or the French language.
We're out of time,
that.
unfortunately.
I think you're mistaken with Zemmour here. I mean, she never talked about a shift of civilization. As a matter of fact, she disagreed with Eric Zemmour on this concept.
Well, we'll hear more in the next weeks, I hope, about this.
We'll hear more about this and the concept of secularism over the next 2 weeks, and about those bread and butter issues which matter to all of our viewers in France and beyond. Lots of coverage coming up of the campaign ahead of that April 24th second round. I want to thank our guests, Lex Paulsen, Denis Francisquin in New York, Annabelle Lever in Fontainebleau. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you.